Today I'm starting another new series called Sake from the Source, where I'll be talking about and tasting sake with the people who actually make it. And for my very first episode, I'm here at Void Sake Company in Lexington, Kentucky with Justin.
Hello.
So, Justin, first thing, tell us about the name of Void Sake. What's the meaning behind that?
Yeah. So the meaning behind void is, one, we were filling the void that was a lack of sake in this region and in America too. So that's where kind of the name initially came from.
Okay.
And then me and the other owners are also big. We're big into like sci-fi and kind of games and whatnot, and so we took on kind of like a cosmic horror kind of vibe to it, and then it just kind of meshed together. And then instead of doing kind of like fear of the unknown, since sake is relatively unknown,
Sure, yeah.
we went with kind of that like intrigue of the unknown.
Okay. Yeah, you can
So-
see it in the names that you have too. So you're not only Kentucky's first sake brewery, but you're also probably the first Lovecraftian sake brewery.
Yeah, I'd say
in
so.
the world, probably. So tell me about your sake journey and how you got into it and why you decided to start brewing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so it really just started out because all three of the owners have been beer homebrewing for a long time, several years before that, and that's how we all met. And I started homebrewing in grad school, but after then, I got involved in kind of the beer industry,
Okay.
in like kind of the industrial, kind of like biology kind of setting.
Oh, okay.
And then started brewing. And then we were experimenting with all kinds of fermentations. I did a lot of meads, wines, kind of weird, funky, wild ferments. And then we just kind of stumbled upon koji, and we did an event where we just did a bunch of Japanese food integrated with beer. And so we did a koji beer.
Oh, interesting.
And that was the first time I grew koji.
Was it koji on wheat or koji on rice?
It was on rice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, being kind of ignorant of the whole thing, we just bought rice, we steamed it like we would at home, and then I basically grew our first batch of koji in my like little safety hood.
Okay, how'd that turn out?
It tasted good.
Oh, okay.
It would not make good sake,
Okay.
but it worked, and we were just kind of enamored by the whole process because it's one thing when you're in beer and you're working with a liquid culture, and one thing, but koji is very different. It's more like culturing or growing a plant
Okay.
because it's solid. It's a solid media. But from there, we just like, man, I wonder what we could do with this. Could we do other stuff? And then one of the guys was like, I think they use that for sake. And we were like, got on the Google machine and looked, and we were like, oh yeah. And then we found a recipe and just started brewing it.
Okay.
And that's kind of where we began making it. But there's a pretty big Japanese kind of population and culture around here. So things like ramen and Japanese cuisine we were familiar with it, and we liked sake, especially going to like karaoke nights and stuff like that. So we were familiar with it, but we just never made it.
Okay. So when did the brewery actually start, and when did you start your first like commercial product?
So once we did that and we made the first batch, and we didn't know kind of the labor that went into it, so we quickly learned that it is labor intensive compared to beer brewing. And we did 10 gallons of it, and it didn't come out like firewater. So we were like, this is actually pretty
Okay,
good.
so you had some hope.
Yeah,
For
we had some hope, and then we were like, kind of our brains started like going into the weeds, and we were like, well, if we tweak this one thing, and so we just kept refining it over probably the course of 2 years, and then started home brewing it at home, and then once in that 2 years, we did a lot of kind of research on our own, and then kind of perfected it to a point where we were like, I would drink this off the shelf.
So let's try something.
Yeah. So we'll start with our kind of our base junmai that we do. It's a clear product, filtered, and the rice we use. So in the U.S., we don't have access to a lot of
I'm just checking out the color here.
yeah, a lot of kind of variety of rices. So our kind of house rice is calrose. It's a pretty common eating rice in the U.S., but there's a lot of different strains and cultivars of it that they mill and pick out, select for sake brewing.
They use table rice for sake in Japan too, so it's totally a thing that's done. Do you charcoal filter it? No,
It's all
so that's
Baroka.
why the color is still in here, kind of greenish gold color. I love that. Okay, yeah, I was getting with the genshu that I had last night too. It's a little bit of like orange, like mandarin orange and grape.
Yeah, so the yeast that we selected, it's yeast number 9.
Oh,
so
okay.
it puts out more fruity esters, and so we'll get customers will say like, oh, I get a lot like melon or cantaloupe, honeydew, and
I'm getting the
citrus.
honeydew now. Yeah, honeydew and citrus and a little bit of grape.
But we thought that that would pair very nicely with the kind of rice, more rice forward flavor that we get with calrose, and kind of we wanted more fuller body sake, but still light and delicate enough for newcomers to appreciate.
Yeah. Is this do you know the Nihonshu dough on this? Do you measure that?
Yeah, we do. So this one, the sake meter value, I think is it's usually at a range of like 0 to +1.
Okay.
So it's on the drier side.
Yeah. But a
but
good
it's-
range for food and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we wanted to keep our sake a little drier. One, like our water is it's a little harder, which leads to fermentation being a little bit more vigorous.
Right.
So lends to a drier product, but we kind of build it up with that fruitiness to kind of accent some of that kind of perceived sweetness that you get.
That's what I was gonna say. So it hits like the very front. It hits a little bit sweet, but then it's like clean and not a lingering sweetness in the end. So I like that. Yeah. So you mentioned about the rice and the water. What are some other challenges that you've kind of faced as a brewery in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, rice is getting quality rice is kind of the big thing. We only get most of our rice is sourced from California. There's I think 2 suppliers that we use, but we also get rice from Arkansas. But right now there's only like 3 suppliers in the U.S. So, and then with the pandemic and everything, supply chains was a big source of headache. But I'd say that's probably a big issue or a big challenge is that, but also just sourcing equipment. So a lot of our stuff we had to either fabricate ourselves or retrofit from beer and wine equipment.
And you were saying your koji table, you actually had that handmade for you.
Yeah, so there's a local woodworker that we commissioned to build that for, and it was kind of one of those weird things. It was like, a koji, what? Like, what is this thing? And so they were like, yeah, all right, I'll never have a commission
Why
like
doesn't
this.
it have a bottom on it? It's
Yeah.
got the slats on it and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so and we used schematics from textbooks and stuff, and gave that to her, and she was all on board.
Okay.
And so, so things like that, like our press, local metal worker who does like big art installations, kind of fabricated that.
Oh,
for
really?
us.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, we try to commission local, builders and artists when we can, but yeah, it's just it's an extra step in planning. It's not like I can just go to a manufacturer, or I guess we could buy it from Japan, but the cost would be
Right. Yeah.
very
Yeah.
high.
And the importing and
Yeah.
everything like that. So, when people think of Kentucky and this area of Kentucky, I think bourbon is probably the thing that they think about. So, what do you think about being a sake brewer in the heartland of bourbon, and also with all the beer breweries that are in Lexington as well?
Yeah, so our kind of tagline that we kind of at the Void is kind of blending Japanese tradition with American craft, and so with our kind of infusions and our kind of philosophy in brewing, because our roots are in craft beer brewing. So trying to bring those kind of drinkers in that are a little bit more adventurous, willing to try new things, um, and also the beer community in Lexington has been really excited about.
Okay. So you think that
Yeah.
that's kind of a positive then?
Yeah, that's a positive because like it's sake being kind of a niche product in America, and Kentucky has a lot of recognizable drinks and brands like bourbon, but people are excited that like with Kentucky being known for bourbon, now they can be known for like sake brewing
So
and
something
beer.
new coming
Yeah.
along. Okay, so let's try the next one.
So the next one gets into our nigori sakis. This one is Opalescent. So this one is kind of our standard nigori sake. This one's a little lower in alcohol, 13%, whereas most of our clear sakis range from anywhere from 18 to 15%.
Yeah, and that's really heavily nigori.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we wanted to go more kind of on the creamy side. The nigoris that we kind of based this off of, we liked more of that kind of rice kind of character, creamy character out of it. So we went a little bit heavier. It's not as heavy as some of the ones that I've seen here in the U.S., but kind of a nice balance of that kind of rice pudding kind of character with the fruitiness of the yeast and everything else. But
yeah, so I'm getting a lot more of the melon in this one, like the honeydew, cantaloupe.
Yeah, so like this one, we call it. It's more like a fruit bomb kind of thing because it is a little sweeter because of the sediment in there, but that just all those flavors kind of drive this sweeter, fruity kind of flavor. But also you get the earthiness of the kind of koji nutty characters.
Yeah.
So it's layered.
Yeah, I'm getting like kind of milky and also like a little bit of rice, not rice bran, but like I can smell the riciness in it as well.
Yeah, this one is one of our go-to favorites.
I like the texture of that.
Yeah, so the way we filter it too, we don't add any kind of kasu or anything back to it. So we try to filter out or get the finer particles out of it. So we filter it a little, or the press filters that we use are a little finer.
Okay.
So some of just the more finer particulates come out, and we kind of strain it for any other bigger particles.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because sometimes the nigori, even in Japan, you can kind of feel it on your tongue, and this you don't feel any grittiness. It's just very like smooth and creamy on the tongue.
Yeah, and that's what we wanted to go for. And then the brands that we tried when we were kind of R&D'ing this in the early days was that we liked the creaminess, the richness of it.
But it's still dry.
Yeah.
It's still on the drier side. So yeah.
So yeah, it's most of our sakis don't have any residual sugar in them, or very, very little. So we kind of keep it that way, but then that's also why we went heavier on the sediment, just to give it more of that perceived sweet.
So you talked about the challenges, and one of them you said was about the water being harder, and you said that makes for a more vigorous fermentation. Like, what else with the water? I'm just kind of interested in that because a lot of breweries in Japan say one of the challenges about brewing in America is the hardness of the water in America. So were there any challenges associated with that?
There was, in further reading when we were doing this, like we wanted to kind of, I wouldn't say terroir is the right word, but we wanted to integrate what makes kind of the bluegrass area unique when it comes to bourbon. They always talk about the water, the limestone water. So we wanted to have that as kind of a supporting character for our sakis. So, and most of the recipes and stuff online, they're like, well, use spring water, very soft water, but it just took some initial tweaking, like with the type, how much yeast we're adding, the temperatures that we're fermenting at. So for all of our junmais, we tend to follow more, like kind of an intermediate, like longer fermentation compared to some other fermentation profiles that you see for junmai. So our ferments tend to be more on the 25 to 30 day.
Okay, so even with it, I mean, that's more like a ginjo length of.
Yeah. So we found that spreading that fermentation out really softens it up. It's not as harsh. You're not getting kind of heavier alcohols in there, so
Okay.
it lends to a kind of a smoother product.